Today is the 9th of June, and the bills are due. The numbers on the paper don't lie. Rent is late. The electric bill has a red stamp on it. The gas tank is nearly empty. And the fridge? Half full, more air than groceries. He sits there in a flannel shirt, hair uncombed, heart heavier than the stack of unopened envelopes. His name is Daniel, a 51-year-old Christian man from rural Georgia, father of two, and the kind of guy who always says, "God bless you," to strangers. He's worked hard his entire life. No handouts, no shortcuts, just hard labor, honest faith, and a deep belief that God provides. But today, that belief is tested. Because no matter how many hours he works, it never feels like enough. The bills arrive faster than the checks. The interest grows like a weed. And his prayers sometimes feel like they bounce off the ceiling. Today, Daniel stared at his phone and whispered, "God, I don't have enough." But then, something strange happened. He felt a warmth behind him, like someone was standing there. He turned. No one. Then a whisper, not from the room, but from within. Heaven has already covered what you can't. This story isn't about budgeting tips. It's not about how to hustle harder. This story is about what heaven does when the math doesn't add up. When your strength runs out. When your income can't keep pace with inflation, emergencies, or the growing needs of the people you love. Because sometimes the gap between what you owe and what you have isn't meant to be filled by effort. It's meant to be filled by grace. Daniel's story started unraveling 2 years ago when the factory he worked at shut down. He'd been there since he was 19, a steady job, a good one. But like many towns in Middle America, the factory closed and moved operations overseas. He was given a severance, sure. But what's a few months of checks to a man with years of bills? He found odd jobs after that: landscaping, fixing fences, helping folks move. He even started selling firewood from the back of his truck. But no matter how much he scraped together, the ends didn't meet. And what hurt the most? His kids started noticing. He could handle hunger. He could handle sleeping with the lights off. But watching his teenage daughter cry because she couldn't go on the school trip, that broke him. So Daniel began praying harder. Every morning at 5 a.m., before the world woke up, he sat on the porch with his coffee, Bible, and tears. "God, I'm trying. Why isn't it enough?" And that's when the first lesson from Archangel Michael came. Provision doesn't always come in dollars. Sometimes it comes in direction. You see, Daniel had spent his entire life believing that a man's worth was tied to what he earned. And now, as he earned less, he felt less. Less valuable, less respected, less masculine. But that morning, something shifted. He opened his Bible to Philippians 4:19, "And my God will supply all your needs according to His riches in glory in Christ Jesus." He stared at the words until they blurred. Your needs, it said, not your wants, not your comforts, but your needs. Daniel whispered, "Lord, I have a need I can't meet." And in that quiet space, he remembered a story his grandfather once told him about the time their crops failed in 1954, and someone anonymously left bags of groceries at their door. No name, just mercy, his grandpa used to say. It was then that Daniel realized heaven never forgot how to deliver. That afternoon, Daniel was checking his mail when he noticed a plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper and $200 in cash. The note read, "You are seen. God provides. Keep going." His hands trembled. He looked around, certain someone was watching. But the street was empty. No neighbors, no cars. Just the sound of wind moving through the trees and a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in months. He fell to his knees on the gravel driveway. Not because of the money, though. It helped. But because heaven had reminded him, you are not forgotten. Today, the 9th of June, you might be like Daniel. You've done everything you know how to do. You've worked, you've prayed, you've stayed faithful. And still, you're staring at a stack of bills that don't care about your heart or your effort. But hear this. Heaven has already covered what you can't. It may not come in the form you expect, but it will come. Because where your strength ends, God's supply begins. And Archangel Michael is just getting started. Daniel didn't move for a long time. His knees rested against the rocky driveway, the edges digging in, but he felt no pain. His hands trembled as they held the envelope creased now from his grip. $200. No signature. No explanation. Just 7 words that felt like they were whispered straight from the throne of God. You are seen. God provides. Keep going. You have to understand something. This wasn't just about money. It was about identity. Because poverty doesn't just empty your wallet, it empties your dignity. Daniel had spent the past year feeling like less of a man, less of a father, less of a husband. His wife, Marcy, had never blamed him, not once. She'd even taken on part-time cleaning work at the church just to help. But Daniel hated the way her hands stayed dry and cracked from scrubbing tile. He hated the way their son asked, "Are we poor now, Dad?" And he hated the way the mailbox felt like a curse waiting to be opened. But this envelope? It wasn't just a gift. It was a message. Heaven sees what men overlook. That night, as they ate dinner leftover beans, toast, and a small bowl of salad, Daniel told his family what happened. He didn't dramatize it. He just told the truth. Someone had sent help. Someone anonymous. And he believed it wasn't someone at all. It was God. Marcy reached across the table, tears pooling in her eyes. Their daughter, Casey, bowed her head in thanks. It wasn't just money that filled their house that night. It was hope. But Archangel Michael wasn't finished. Daniel had a dream. It was vivid, more real than anything he'd ever experienced. In it, he was standing in a barren field. Dry soil, cracked earth, no crops, no clouds. And then a voice behind him said, "This is what you see. Now, look again." He turned. The same field, but now, bursting with green. Tall stalks of wheat, wildflowers blooming, and the sky radiant with golden light. He looked down. Water rushed beneath his feet, not visible at first, but always flowing. He awoke gasping. And he understood. Provision isn't always above the surface, but it's always moving beneath your feet. Archangel Michael's second divine principle is called the underground flow. It means that God is often providing in ways you can't yet see. He is stirring hearts, preparing doors, aligning opportunities. But because it doesn't show up instantly on your doorstep, you assume it's not happening. That's the lie the enemy wants you to believe. That silence equals abandonment. That delay means denial. But Michael speaks plainly. Heaven is never late. Heaven is layered. There are things moving for you right now in the spirit realm that you may not see until next week, next month, or maybe tomorrow. Daniel didn't change overnight. He still had bills, still had stress. But something within him had been planted a deep conviction that his job was obedience, and God's job was overflow. He began writing down every small provision he could find. A neighbor who dropped off extra eggs. A church member who gifted him gas money just because. An online job that paid more than expected. He called it his river journal. Because now he understood. The river was always flowing. You just had to look below the surface. And maybe yes, you feel like you're standing in a dry field today. You see the bills. You feel the pressure. You wonder if you failed. But Archangel Michael says, this isn't failure, it's formation. God is training your eyes to see the invisible, to trust the river beneath the drought, to believe when the account is low, but the faith is rising. So here's your action step. Start your river journal today. Write down every small sign of provision, not just cash but kindness. Not just solutions, but surprises. Not just answers, but alignment. Because when you start seeing the flow, you start expecting the flood. And God always honors expectation. Tomorrow, Daniel's breakthrough will begin. Not just through faith, but through favor. And you need to be ready to receive it too. Because what heaven has already covered is bigger than any bill and closer than you think. The next morning, Daniel stepped outside before the sun rose. The grass was still damp. Birds hadn't yet begun to sing. The town was quiet just the way he liked it when he needed to listen. He held his coffee in one hand and his river journal in the other. And as he opened it, he noticed something strange. The entries were small, but they were multiplying. A discount at the grocery store that wasn't supposed to apply. A friend who canceled a debt from years ago, saying, "I don't need it." A stranger at the gas station who swiped their card to top off Daniel's tank. It was as if heaven had started leaving breadcrumbs to me, miraculous clues that said, provision isn't coming, it's already here. That's when Archangel Michael delivered the third principle of the divine covering. You were never meant to carry what was designed to be covered. Daniel had spent so long believing that being a man meant carrying every burden alone. He thought his job was to hold it all together, even when the weight bent his back, even when it crushed his joy, even when it made him silently resent his own prayers. But Michael whispered again, "You are not the source. You are the steward." Let's pause here. You who are listening, who feel like you're failing your family, failing yourself, you were never meant to be the source. That's God's job. Your job is to receive, manage, and multiply what heaven pours into your life. And sometimes, to rest. Because fear whispers, if you rest, you'll fall behind. But faith says, if you rest in God, He will move while you sleep. Daniel began making a small but powerful shift. Instead of asking, how do I fix this? He started asking, what has God already put in my hand? That question changed everything. Because when you look for what you don't have, you panic. But when you look at what you do have, you begin to partner with God. Daniel's hands didn't hold a high-paying job. He didn't have a degree. He didn't have investors or mentors or a plan B. But what he did have was 2 good hands, a reputation for honesty, a community that trusted him, a truck, and a heart willing to work. And just like Moses standing before the Red Sea, Daniel heard the echo of that ancient question, what is in your hand? The same God who used a staff to split the sea would use Daniel's simple strengths to open a way forward. That week, Daniel got a call from an old friend, Scott, who owned a small contracting business. "Hey," Scott said, "I heard you've been doing odd jobs. I need someone I can trust on site. Can you swing a hammer?" Daniel laughed. "I've been swinging hammers longer than I've been shaving." Scott said, "Good, the job's yours, and if it works out, we'll talk about keeping you full-time." It wasn't a miracle in the clouds. It wasn't $1 million falling from the sky, but it was enough. And it was evidence. Michael calls this the circle of enough. It's the moment when you realize that what you have right now, your gifts, your relationships, your favor is not a mistake. It's divine currency. And when you invest it in faith, it multiplies. Daniel stepped onto the construction site that Monday with his old boots and borrowed tools. He was nervous. He hadn't worked full days in months. But by noon, he found his rhythm, nailing, measuring, lifting. By the end of the week, Scott handed him an envelope. "Cash for now, until we get payroll going. You earned it." Inside, more than Daniel had made in a month. He wept in the cab of his truck. Not because of the money, but because he knew what it meant. Heaven had already covered it. He just hadn't seen the delivery route. You may not have a Scott. You may not have a truck, or a river journal, or a job offer waiting. But you do have something in your hand. And it's time you ask the question, what has God already given me that I've overlooked? Because the answer isn't out there. It's already with you. In your skills, in your people, in your faith, in your obedience. So today, stop saying, I can't. Start saying, what can I give, serve, or move right now? That's where the flow begins. That's how bills get paid. Not always in one swoop, but in steady steps of faith. Because heaven is practical, and favor often walks in through doors humility opens. Daniel sat in his truck long after the workday ended. He held the envelope in both hands like it was made of glass, not because of the money, but because it symbolized something far deeper. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just surviving. He was participating in his own provision. He realized that heaven didn't just drop miracles from the sky. Sometimes God places miracles inside people, in jobs, in conversations, in second chances. Daniel whispered, "Thank you," and turned his eyes upward. And once again, Archangel Michael spoke. "Now that your hands are full, keep your heart soft, because what happens next is where most people fail." See, when you've suffered a long time, the pain doesn't just vanish when relief comes. There's a lingering fear, a hesitation to trust again, a voice that says, "What if this disappears too?" Michael calls this dangerous voice the scarcity phantom. It haunts those who've been broke, betrayed, or overlooked for too long. Even when things get better, it whispers, "Don't trust it. Hold everything tightly. Prepare for the worst. Enjoy nothing fully just in case." Daniel heard it creep in by midweek. He got his first real paycheck from Scott. But instead of celebrating, he started calculating, worrying if it would last, wondering if something would go wrong, expecting the rug to be pulled out again. That night he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, arms crossed, mind racing, until Marcy gently said, "You're holding your breath again." He didn't answer. But she was right. Even with money in the bank and gas in the truck, Daniel was living like the blessing could vanish in an instant. That's when Michael gave the fourth principle of divine covering. Security isn't in the check, it's in the channel. God is not just your provider. He's your source. Jobs may change. Markets may crash. People may pull away. But the river keeps flowing because it doesn't come from the world. It comes from the one who never dries out. The paycheck is a channel. The friend who helps is a channel. The job site is a channel. But God is the source behind it all. And when you know that, you stop living in fear of losing. You start living in faith that it will keep coming. Daniel decided to do something bold. He tithed. It wasn't much, just 10% of what he made that week. But for a man who had been counting every penny for over a year, it was an act of warfare. He wrote the check and placed it in the offering basket at church. As he did, his hand shook. Not from fear, from freedom. Because when you give from a place of gratitude, not surplus, it becomes worship. It tells heaven, "I trust you more than I trust this money." That Sunday, Pastor Davis preached on Malachi 3:10. "Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven." Daniel didn't hear the rest of the sermon. He didn't have to. He knew what was happening. The floodgates were starting to creak open. And they did. The following week, Scott offered Daniel a long-term role with benefits. Then Marcy was offered more hours at the church. A neighbor offered to sell them a used car for cheap exactly when their truck began showing signs of trouble. Things that had once felt impossible were now unfolding with ease. But Daniel didn't credit luck. He credited alignment. Because that's what happens when you obey despite fear. When you give, even when you want to cling. When you trust the source more than the situation. Michael reminds us, your faith doesn't just activate favor, it attracts it. When heaven sees someone who still worships while wounded, still gives while worried, still prays while pressured, that person becomes a magnet for miracles. So if you've received something from God recently, don't respond with fear. Respond with generosity, not just of money, but of hope, of gratitude, of confidence. You're not at the mercy of your job. You're under the shadow of the Almighty, and His resources are never empty. By the end of the month, Daniel's life looked almost unrecognizable. Not because he struck gold, not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because something sacred had been restored, his faith in provision, his confidence as a man of God, and most of all, his peace. You see, when bills still came, he no longer panicked. When unexpected expenses showed up like a flat tire or an extra school fee, he didn't spiral into shame or fear. He simply whispered the words that had become a weapon in his mouth. Heaven has already covered it. Because now he understood. Provision isn't about abundance. It's about alignment with the one who owns everything. Archangel Michael's final lesson in the divine covering system is simple, but it separates those who merely survive from those who truly live. Abundance is not how much you hold, it's how fully you trust. Let that settle in. Because there are millionaires who live in fear, and there are struggling families who laugh and worship with joy. The difference? Not their bank account, their belief account. Daniel's account wasn't overflowing, but his heart was, and that changed the way he moved through life. He began waking up early, not with dread, but with direction. He no longer felt embarrassed at church. He no longer avoided the mailbox. He no longer snapped at his kids from stress. He was lighter, not because his burdens vanished, but because he had finally laid them down. One Sunday morning, something happened that brought the entire journey full circle. Pastor Davis asked during the service if anyone had a testimony to share. Daniel hesitated, but Marcy nudged him. "You should," she whispered. "You need to." He stepped forward, palms sweaty, voice tight. But as soon as he spoke, the words flowed like they had been waiting for years. "I used to think being a provider meant carrying everything, that if I didn't have all the answers, I was failing my family. I prayed, I cried, and I cursed my own name in silence." He paused, looked at the congregation. Tears welled in his eyes. "But then God reminded me, I was never the provider. He is. And when I finally let him carry what I couldn't, he sent help, he sent people, he sent work, and he sent peace." The church was quiet. And then applause. Not for Daniel, but for what God had done through his surrender. And now, Archangel Michael turns to you. Yes, you. The one listening, hoping, hurting, calculating how you'll survive this week. You've done all you can. You've stretched, saved, skipped meals, stayed silent, smiled through pain. But here's the divine truth. God is not waiting for you to figure it out. He's waiting for you to hand it over. Because heaven does not operate by your budget. Heaven operates by your belief. Here are your final steps, the divine covering code to walk in daily. Reclaim the gaze. Stop staring only at what you lack. Start noticing where God is already moving. Follow the underground flow. Provision is always flowing. Keep a river journal. Expect surprises. Honor small things. Steward, don't strive. You're not the source. You're the vessel. Carry what's yours. Release what's God's. Give while it's scarce. Generosity in lack is what activates supernatural multiplication. Trust is the currency of heaven. Peace isn't found in digits. It's found in surrender. You may still have bills to pay, but now you also have a revelation. Heaven has already covered what you can't. The job offer you don't know is coming. The friend who's about to help. The opportunity that's waiting for your yes. It's not luck. It's not coincidence. It's divine design. So, take a breath. Look up. Open your hands. And say with full authority, "What I can't carry is already covered." That's not weakness. That's warfare in the language of heaven. And now that you've said it, watch what begins to move.